I don't want to seem immodest this morning, but I want you all to know that last night I practiced what I preached. Last night my topic was about doubt and remaining faithful in the midst of doubts. And I want you to know that at dinner, before we gathered last night, one of the clasps of my suspenders broke. And so when I came here, I had grave doubts as to whether one suspender could bear the enormous burden that my suspenders must bear for a man of my stature. But in spite of those doubts, I remained faithful, committed to my purpose, and I got through the lesson. And I know the congregation can say amen when I say we are all grateful that one suspender was able to do the job. Well, just last week, I happened to see this headline in the news from Gallup polling organization: belief in God in the U.S. dips to 81%, a new low. And frankly, even without that statistical reinforcement, I would imagine that all of us here can tell stories about people we know who have walked away from the faith. When I was a kid, I don't think I even knew an atheist. But now all of us know someone who does not believe. Our theme this week at the lectureship is "The Gospel is for All." And this morning, I want to present the gospel for those who don't believe. I want to present the gospel by comparing the view of reality that is found in the Gospels with the view of reality that is found in atheism. Here's how I want to do that. First of all, to represent the viewpoint of atheism, I want to draw from a book written by an atheist philosopher whose name is Alex Rosenberg, which is called The Atheist's Guide to Reality. It addresses the most fundamental question of all, which is, what is real? And his answer is, here is what is not real. There are no angels, there are no demons, there is no human soul, there is no God. All that exists, all that is real, is clumps of matter, atoms and molecules operating under the laws and forces of physics. One of the phrases he uses over and over again in the book is, the physical facts fix all the facts. In other words, the ultimate foundation of all reality is just matter. And anything else that you may think exists is just an illusion. That's what the subtitle of this book is, Enjoying Life Without Illusions. That's why it has this mesmerizing optical illusion cover. By contrast, what do the Gospels say the ultimate foundation of all reality is? To illustrate the worldview of the Gospels, I want to draw on a story that everybody knows, believer or unbeliever. I think maybe the most famous story Jesus ever told. If you'd like to go with me to Luke chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan. This story is so well known that even the TV show Seinfeld, which does not exactly have a lot of religious overtones to it, drew upon the story for its grand finale when Jerry and Elaine and George and Kramer are convicted for violating the Good Samaritan law. Everybody knows this story. It begins with an exchange between Jesus and an expert in the Jewish law in chapter 10 of Luke, verse 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." This reflects a much different kind of answer to the question, what is real? Because what is suggested, what is clearly implied in this account is that beyond clumps of matter, beyond atoms and molecules, there is a much more important foundation to all reality. And that foundation is God himself. And so, with these two starkly different understandings of what is real, I want to compare these two versions of reality. Beginning with this point. If all that exists are atoms and molecules, bouncing around according to the laws of physics, how can one mass of molecules be more moral than another mass of molecules? So the first thing I want to point out is that according to the view of atheism, right and wrong do not exist. Rosenberg says atheism rejects the distinction between acts that are morally permitted, morally forbidden, and morally required. Now, by contrast, I want you to just think about the story that Jesus tells here in Luke chapter 10. Verse 29, but he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. Now, what Jesus is teaching us here is that right and wrong are revealed by God. Why do we love each other? You shall love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. We have a responsibility to love one another. That is what determines what is right and wrong, and that itself is based on the foundation of the reality of God. But if you do not believe God exists, why should we love each other? You remember what Rosenberg said is atheism denies the distinction between moral acts that are permitted, forbidden, and required. Do you know what that means in light of this story? It means that there is no moral difference between what the robbers did and what the priest and Levite did and what the Samaritan did. It's all the same. By the way, Bubba, you mentioned watching some of our lessons on the Valrico website. In the early weeks of the pandemic, I felt bad that the kids weren't getting Bible classes, so I decided to take my stab at doing Bible classes. And so I did the story of the Good Samaritan, but I don't have any Bible character figurines at my house. So scrambling around, I found a Michael Scott figurine from The Office. So he was the man who was attacked. And the priest and Levite were Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine. And then the Good Samaritan was Finn from the last 3 episodes. That was the best I could do. So these kids are going to be scarred for life in their understanding of this story. But if there is no right and wrong, we could just as easily commend what the robbers did as what the Good Samaritan did, because it is all the same. We could commend what the Levite and the priest did as well as the Samaritan, because it is all the same. Do you really believe that? Does anybody really believe that? The issue is not simply, though, that you believe there is right and wrong. Didn't you always hate it in math class when your teachers would say, show your work? So I think most everybody, when they read this story, intuitively understand that what the thieves did and what the priest and Levite did was wrong, objectively wrong. And what the Samaritan did was right, objectively right. But the issue is, how do you account for that? So Bubba mentioned that through a hobby I have of singing barbershop, that I have acquired a very unusual friends list on Facebook. About half of my friends are people in the little barbershop community, and it's a very diverse community. People from all belief systems, lifestyles. And so it has given me a chance that I'm very appreciative of, to reach out to people who are not believers. So, some of you remember the terrible story a few years ago that took place at the Cincinnati Zoo when a little boy got away from his parent and got into the enclosure with a giant gorilla, Harambe. And the gorilla became immediately aggressive toward the child, leaving the zookeepers with an instantaneous decision: what do we do? And they decided to put the gorilla down. So I used this as an opportunity. On Facebook, I asked my friends who are not believers, I would like to know, if you faced the same choice, what choice would you make? And show your work. Tell me why you would make the choice that you made. Of course, as Christians who believe that God is the ultimate foundation of reality, we believe that God has made us in His image, and human life is sacred, and all life is a gift of God, but human life is special. Here's what one of my friends who's not a believer said: you defend your tribe. We're the human tribe. That was the gorilla tribe. And the only obligations that would seem to exist are within one's own tribe. Another friend, not a barbershop friend, she's actually one of my oldest friends, elementary school friends, said, the brotherhood of man is a social construct, much like religion. He's throwing a little bit of shade at me there, that unites the tribe, society, and provides for stability and growth. It's a force for good, or it can be or should be, but it seems to me that the value of human life, anything, comes from that social stability and security. In other words, it is just a construct. So then I ask her this question: if morality is just a construct and can differ from one tribe to another, there are tribes whose moral belief is it is perfectly acceptable to kidnap little girls and sell them into the slave trade for sexual gratification. That is literally their tribal morality. If right and wrong are condemned only on the basis of what's good for your tribe versus another, how could we who are not in that tribe tell these people that is wrong, objectively wrong? And her answer was, well, I guess I didn't take enough philosophy class. You don't have to take any philosophy class to know the answer to that question. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, why is it that the story of the Good Samaritan packs such a punch? It is precisely because the Samaritan is not of the same tribe as the man who was wounded, who is presumably Jewish. But just because he's not of the same tribe, would any of us think it would be okay for the Samaritan to see this fellow human being suffering and decide, because he's Jewish and I'm Samaritan, I will just let him die? You cannot believe in a brotherhood of man without the fatherhood of God, or else things do devolve into simple tribal morality. Now, I want to stress, I am not saying that Darla and Lance and my other friends who responded that day are immoral people in their conduct. I will grant that there are many atheists who live better moral lives than many professed Christians. This is not a newsflash. Paul told the Corinthians, you have a man living with his father's wife, and not even the pagans would do that. The issue here is, how do you account for what you believe is right and wrong? And that is the issue that I believe the story of Christianity gives us a clearly superior answer than the story told by atheism. Here's another point. If there is no right and wrong, on what basis could we hold people accountable for the things they choose to do? Well, it turns out atheism doesn't think we choose to do what we do, because free will does not exist. It is just an illusion. I mean, here is my handkerchief. It is just molecules and atoms. And when I throw it up, the laws of physics say it will come down. It's not choosing to come down. It just does what the laws of physics make it do. If I am materially no different than this handkerchief. I also am just atoms and molecules. Then what I do is just exactly what this handkerchief does, which is I'm just molecules in motion manipulated by the laws of physics. Rosenberg says, every state of my brain is fixed by physical facts. There is no free will, just the feeling, the illusion of introspection. Now compare this to the Samaritan story, which over and over again presents us with choices being made. The choice of the thieves to attack and beat and rob the man. The choice of the priest and the Levite to pass by on the other side. The choice of the Samaritan to help him out. Nobody reads this story and says, well, look at these spinning atoms just doing what physics dictates that they do. Everyone, when they read this story, understands that we are free to choose what is right and wrong. That's why Jerry, Elaine, George, and Kramer end up in prison. Because the judge determined what they chose to do was wrong. Now here's what Rosenberg would say if he was here. Well, you just think you have free will. That's your problem. Because not only is right and wrong an illusion, and not only is free will an illusion, thinking is an illusion. So here is one of history's greatest thinkers, and he is contemplating one of my favorite thoughts. Now, if matter is the ultimate foundation of all reality, and nothing else exists, you don't have a soul, you don't have a mind, you just have a brain, gray matter. And that gray matter is simply doing whatever physics tells it to do. And fundamentally, it is no different from the clumps of matter, wonderful, sugary, fatty matter that make up the donut. But it's still just all matter, all the same. Now then, does a donut think? Obviously not. Well, if Homer's soul does not exist, and Homer's mind does not exist, all he has is a brain which is a clump of matter like the donut. If the donut does not think, does Homer think either? Here's what Rosenberg says. How can one clump of stuff anywhere in the universe be about? If I ask you to think about something, I'm asking you to direct your mind, to intentionally guide it towards some thought. But what he's saying is a donut can't direct itself toward a thought. And if the brain is just like the donut, then how can one clump of stuff anywhere in the universe be about some other clump of stuff anywhere else in the universe? So if you went by Professor Rosenberg's office and you ask him, what are you thinking about? The only consistent answer he could give is nothing, because you cannot think. Now, by contrast, consider what Jesus tells us in this story. First of all, he asks the lawyer, what is written in the law? How does it read to you? Presuming that the lawyer can read and think and comprehend. Not only that, in verse 36, after Jesus tells the actual story, he says, which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? If you are not a believer, I would simply ask you, which story makes more sense? The story that we do not think at all, it's just an illusion. Or the story given to us here in the Gospels, that we have minds that think. Now you may say, well, come on. Of course I think. I'm conscious of my thoughts. I'm consciously aware of what I am thinking right now. Well, here's what Dr. Rosenberg would say. Is a donut conscious of anything? And if I am just atoms and molecules like a donut, am I really conscious of anything? Now, let me just say that quite often on Sunday mornings at Valrico, as I gaze out at the audience, I do question whether consciousness exists in certain instances here. But I'm not making an absolute claim about that. Here's what Rosenberg tells us. He says, when consciousness assures us that we have thoughts about stuff, it has to be wrong. The brain non-consciously stores information in thoughts, but thoughts are not about stuff. So not only do right and wrong not exist, not only does free will not exist, not only does thinking not exist, you are not even conscious. It's all an illusion. When you think you sense pain, it's an illusion. When you think you taste or smell or see color, it is just an illusion. When you feel emotions, it is just an illusion. So let me illustrate this point like this. How many of you have ever seen one of these things? Raise your hands. Yeah, a lot of us in here. So this is a tool that's supposed to determine how much pain you were in. So I have some knee issues, and when I moved to Florida, I had to make arrangements to see a new orthopedist. And the one I was assigned to was Dr. Vo. He's from Vietnam. Actually, quite a compelling story. He was, some of you will remember the people who sought refuge on boats. And I mean, here is this guy who is a very young child, clinging to life in a boat, and now has made his way to America, and now he's a doctor, and it's really quite a moving story. Anyway, so first thing I did when I went to this clinic is they said, okay, we're going to take some x-rays. So they took me to the room, and those of you who've had this done, they x-ray your knees from all different angles. And then they took me into the exam area. His assistant came in and asked me a few questions, put the x-rays up. And then Dr. Vo walked in. And not the greatest bedside manner of any doctor I've ever had. He didn't say hello, didn't introduce himself. He just walked in, he just turned and he started looking at the x-rays. And he just started shaking his head. And then he started muttering. And then he looked at me and he said ominously, "You have many reasons to feel pain." It was a pretty chilling moment. It was like he was a villain in a James Bond movie, just about to do some torture. You have many reasons to feel pain. All right, so here's the thing. Whenever I go through this whole rigmarole. They do the x-rays. I want you to think, by virtue of the x-rays, one time they did an MRI, they can see all the atoms and molecules. But they still ask me, how much pain are you in? Now, if all there is to me is the atom and molecule, they've got access to all of that information. Why are they asking me how much pain I'm in? They're asking me because they know there is more to me than atoms and molecules. And in addition to that, which they can see by x-rays, they want information that only the conscious me can give them by my first person experience, which comes from consciousness. Otherwise, it's just C fibers misfiring. Is that how the story of the Samaritan goes? Did the Samaritan go up to him and say, "Boy, tough break. Fortunately, you're not conscious of any pain. You just have fibers that are misfiring"? In fact, all through this story, we see examples of conscious experiences of pain and of emotion. Do you remember what Jesus says about the Samaritan in verse 33? When he came to where he was and he saw him, he felt compassion. Do you know what Rosenberg and people like him say compassion is? Compassion is purely a physical reaction taking place determined by the laws of physics. It may be the case that through evolution we have been adapted to feel compassion for people who are suffering, but if you rewound the evolutionary tape and played it again, a totally different outcome could have happened in which you would feel compassion not for the man who was injured, but for the robber. Because it's just a random evolutionary process. Or you would feel compassion for the priest or the Levite. Is that really what you believe? Is that what reality is for you? I don't believe this is the world that any of us truly live in. And in our speculative philosophical moments, we might try to argue these things are true. But in our intuitive grasp of reality, we know that they are not. So this has been a little philosophical this morning. So here is the exam to end our time together today. It stems from an embarrassing experience from my childhood when I was in the 3rd grade, Shear Elementary School, Winchester, Kentucky. I was sitting at the table with a bunch of other students. John Brooks was across from me, and he had the box of crayons. And I wanted to use some, and he wouldn't give them to me. And I asked, and he wouldn't give them to me, and I got really mad, and finally, I just started wringing his neck. It was not a proud moment in my life. All I can say is, if I ask for the crayons, you just better give them to me, all right? Because something bad could go down. All right, so I am reflecting on whether I should have chosen to cause pain to John Brooks to get the colored crayons. In view of the understanding of reality presented by Rosenberg, how many of these statements have logical, meaningful content? Well, in the first place, he said that right and wrong, morality is just an illusion. Well, when I say things like I should or I shouldn't, I'm making a moral statement that adheres right and wrong. So we got to eliminate that one. And then he said, not only is right and wrong an illusion, he said free will is an illusion. So any statement up here that carries with it the idea of the use of the will, I have to eliminate. So I didn't make a choice. The laws of physics simply spun my atoms in the direction of wringing his neck. All right. Then he said, thinking does not exist. It's an illusion. So any statement up here that has to do with thinking, we have to eliminate. And reflecting, of course, is that. And then he said that consciousness is an illusion. It doesn't exist. Things like the experience of pain, the experience of the self, the experience of color. So that means there was no pain, there was no John Brooks conscious to experience the pain, and there was no conscious experience of color. Which means of this whole statement, I am reflecting on whether I should have chosen to cause pain to John Brooks to get the colored crayons. The only thing that is left in the atheist worldview is crayons. Colorless crayons. Is that the view of reality that you believe makes the most sense? The view of reality given to us here in the story that Jesus tells in Luke 10 is a view of reality that, on the other hand, fully acknowledges the fact there is evil and suffering in this world. The evil actions of the thieves, the suffering of the man who was attacked. But it is also a world in which there is truth, and there is goodness, and there is beauty. There's love and compassion and virtue. That is the story told by the Gospels. It's the story told by Christianity. Now, I'm not suggesting to you this morning that by looking at this contrast, that we have answered all questions there may be about the faith and responded to all objections that are raised by atheists. But I will say this as someone who has grappled with doubt in many periods in my life and recognizes there are many questions I have about Christianity. I can say this, based on what we have looked at today, the questions of Christianity are far superior to the answers of atheism. So, let's take a break.